Next, let's go in and make some modifications to our asteroid 1 object. Now remember, this is the parent object of our other 2 asteroids. In this more complex version of the game, we'll still use a little bit of the functionality inherent in parent and child objects, but we're also going to modify what happens with our smaller asteroids, so we'll need to add some additional events and actions to those smaller asteroids, those child objects. So the create event doesn't change any, the outside event doesn't change any, but our collision between the asteroid and the ship is going to change quite a bit. So let me show you what we need to do here. First of all, in this version of the game, we're not going to have a health bar, so we can delete that. But we're going to have a lot of other stuff. One of the things that we are going to add to this more complex version is a new variable, and we're going to set the variable to tell whether or not our ship is invincible or not. So even though we haven't created that variable yet, we can do a check for it here, and then I'll create it elsewhere, and I'll show you how that works. Okay, so let's go down to our control section and come down to the variable, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to test whether or not our ship is invincible. And in order to check that, we need to put in the name of the variable, which we haven't actually created yet. I'm going to call mine Invincible, and I'm going to check whether it's true. And GameMaker needs to know where this variable exists. So before I finish this, I'm going to close it out, and let's go ahead and create that variable now. It'll make life a little easier as we move along. So go over to your controller object, and on your create event, you can get rid of the health, because we're no longer going to have a health bar. But we are now going to have a new variable. So let's come down to Control and down to the Variable section and choose Set Variable. And we're going to call the variable Invincible. Make sure you spell it right. Which I didn't. Invincible. And we're going to set the value to false. Alright, so we're creating a new variable called Invincible, setting it to false. And since this is on our controller object, that means as soon as the game starts, or as soon as a given level starts, that Invincible variable will be set to false, so the ship won't be invincible. It'll be able to collide with asteroids. We're going to make other changes to this object controller later, but we can leave it for now. And we'll come back now to our asteroid object and continue modifying it. So again, now, opening up this test variable, I'm checking to see whether the invincible variable is true, and I need to tell GameMaker where that variable exists. Well, we just put it onto the controller object, so I'm going to say applies to controller object. Now, what does it mean if that invincible is true? Well, if that is true, we don't want anything to happen. Basically, we want to exit out of this whole event, because what we're about to set up is the destruction of our ship and the destruction of the asteroid, and we're going to create new asteroid. We're going to do a whole bunch of stuff. But if the ship is invincible, none of that should happen. So what we're going to say is, if it's true that the ship is invincible, we're going to exit the event. That's still on that controller tab under the other section. And then after that, if we haven't exited, then everything else is going to happen, which means, by default, that the ship is not invincible. So, what are we going to do if it's not invincible and it collides, the asteroid collides with the ship? Well, we're going to play a sound. And the sound we're going to play is the ship explosion. And we're going to do a change instance action. This is on the main 1 tab. Drag it down right underneath the sound playing. And we're going to apply this to other. So we're applying it to the ship. Remember, we're on the asteroid object. We're going to change the ship object from the regular old ship into the Invincible version of the ship. Okay? So we've got to create that, right? Right now we've got our regular ship, but we don't have our fancy Invincible ship. So before we change this in, let's open up our... we need to create our Invincible version of the ship. So let's do that next. And the creation of the Invincible version of our ship object is simultaneously easy and a little bit tricky. So let me get to the easy part. To create this Invincible version of our ship object, all we need to do is click on our existing ship object, right-click on it, choose Duplicate. Then we'll change the name. I'm going to call mine obj_invincible. And then obviously I don't want the sprite to be our existing ship sprite, we want it to be the Invincible sprite. And I'm going to choose the straight version of that sprite. Then, that was the easy part. We could just copy the existing one. The little bit harder part is we're going to need to go through and check all of these events and the actions that go with them to make sure that what we're actually showing on the screen is the correct version of the ship. If you don't do this carefully, what will happen is your ship will run into an asteroid and it will, behind the scenes, it will change into the Invincible ship, but it may or may not actually look like the Invincible ship. It may just look like the regular old ship. So let's start off by going into our Create event. Click on the Change Sprite action, and you'll see currently it's just changing into the regular ship. So we need to select that and choose the Invincible Straight. And not only that, if you remember I showed you a few minutes ago our Invincible ship sprites and that each one consists of 2 sub-images so that the ship will show up flashing. So I need to change the sub-image that we're going to show to 0. And then for the speed, I'm going to put 0.5, so I'm slowing down the playing of that 2-frame animation so that it won't blink so quickly. Looking at our step event, nothing has changed there. Coming down to our left keyboard event, we need to change from the regular version of the ship facing left to the left version of the Invincible one, sticking with sub-image 0, setting the speed to 0.5. And you may sense a pattern. Up, we don't do anything. Going right, we need to change into the right version of the Invincible ship. Set the sub-image again to 0, and the speed to 0.5. And then nothing changes on going down. Nothing changes on outside the room. And nothing changes on our space bar. We're just going to create our laser. But on the left and right release, we need to change those as well. And remembering that what we want to do is change it back to the straight version of the ship. Choosing sub-image 0, speed of 0.5. Doing the same thing now for the release right. Choosing the sub-image straight. The sprite straight, sub-image 0, speed of 0.5. And nothing changes with the up or the down release. Well, that was a lot. Also, one other thing I want you to do is make sure here on your asteroid, coming back now, so we're done with our Invincible object. Now we're returning to our asteroid object so we can continue making modifications to it. And one thing you will want to check on your asteroids is that you don't want them to be solid. So if yours happens to show solid here, be sure to deselect that. Alright, now we're stepping back again once more into our Asteroid 1 object with the collision with the ship event, and continuing to work our way through there. So remember, we check to see if we're invincible, and if we were, we exited. If not, we continue by playing the explosion sound for the ship, and now we can change our image, selecting the other, meaning the ship, into our invincible object. And we want to perform the actions that are on that invincible object. Okay? Another thing we're going to do is we're going to change the position of our ship. So after we change the instance from regular ship to the invincible ship, then we're going to move that ship. So come up to the Move tab, to the Jump section, and just below the Change Instance into the Invincible ship, we're going to select that invincible ship as the object that this jump is going to apply to. And we want it to be out in the middle of the room. So we're going to use a built-in variable in GameMaker called room_width. We're going to divide that by 2 for our x-coordinate, and we're going to choose room_height divided by 2 for our y-coordinate, and that will take our ship, our invincible ship, and stick it right into the middle of the room. Next, we're going to create a new instance of an object out on the screen. And what is the object we're going to create? We're going to create our shield. So we need to create our shield over in the library so that then we can take our action here and create that instance. So let's come out of here for a moment, create a new object, call it obj_shield, and we've got to set up a few events and actions for our shield. So I'm going to do a create event, and when we create the shield, here's where I'm going to change that invincible variable. So remember, when we started the room, it got sent to false, but now that the player has been killed by colliding with an asteroid, we're going to give them a brief moment of safety by setting them to invincible. So I do a create, and I'm going to set a variable. I need to tell GameMaker where that variable is. It's on the controller object. And then I need to type in the name of that variable, and I'm going to set it to true. So they're now briefly going to be invincible. And since I say that they're briefly going to be invincible, if I want to have some timing, then I need to set a clock. So on this create event, I'll also set the clock. I'll just choose alarm 0, and I'm going to set it to, in my case, 60, which is going to be 2 seconds. So they'll be safe for 2 seconds. You can make it longer if you want to give them a little more time of safety. Then we're going to add another event, which is the alarm event, choosing alarm 0. And so what happens after 2 seconds? Well, this is going to get called, and what do we want to occur then? Well, we're going to make them not be invincible anymore. So I'm going to set that invincible variable, which if you remember was sitting on the controller, and I'm going to set it to false. Then, if they're no longer invincible, there should be just the regular ship, right? So I'm going to do a change instance, and I'm going to choose that invincible ship, and I'm going to change it back into the regular ship, and we'll perform the actions that are on that regular ship. So what happens? Shield gets created. We make sure the player is now invincible for 2 seconds. At the end of 2 seconds, we make them no longer invincible, and we change from the invincible version of the ship back to the regular version of the ship. Last but not least, we're going to create a step event. We need our shield object to move in conjunction with our ship or our invincible ship object, so that it appears that it's always in the same position. So we're going to come up to the Move tab and choose the Jump to Position action. And what are we going to jump to? We're going to jump to our invincible ship object. So I type that here under object obj_invincible.x and obj_invincible.y. That'll make it follow along as long as this object is on the screen, which it will be until 2 seconds have passed. Alright, now we're done with creating our shield object. One last thing I forgot to do. While we're on our shield object, of course, we need to give it a sprite. So choose the sprite shield. Okay, now we're done with it. Finally, coming all the way back again to our asteroid object. Continuing down our monster list of actions. Now we need to come down back to our create instance of an object action, and finally we have our shield object so that we can create that object. And where's the shield object going to be? No surprise, it too is going to be positioned in the middle of the room. So room width divided by 2 and room height divided by 2. Next, if the asteroid smacks into the ship, the player needs to lose a life. Oh, sounds a little sad. So we'll come down to the Score tab, and we'll choose a Set Lives, and we'll do -1. Make it relative, so they're going to lose 1 life. Right. Then, here just to make it clear, it doesn't matter necessarily in here. So now the rest is the same. We've got our medium-sized asteroids being created, and then we destroy the asteroid that we started with, the big asteroid. Wow. Alright, so lots and lots and lots of changes taking place there. Make sure to save your game. And it'd be a good time to test it. So let's test what we've got so far. Things may or may not be working perfectly because we still have a ways to go in terms of setting up all the other pieces. But here we've got our ship. Fires lasers. It creates some nice explosions. If I get hit by one, right now nothing's happening because we haven't set up our collision with our small or medium-sized asteroids yet. It's still doing the old version, so let's continue on and we'll make that work. So let's open up our asteroid object again. Now we'll come down to the collision with laser. And what's going to happen if the player manages to hit the asteroid with the laser? Well, we want to give them some points. So we'll go to our Score tab and choose Set Score. I'm going to give them 10 points, and I'll just say relative, of course. So we're going to add 10 points to their existing score. And then outside room is the same. So at long last, we're done with our first asteroid changes. So you saw that with our other asteroids, we hadn't gotten them set up yet, so we need to go and make a lot of changes to those as well. Let's see, first of all, where we ended up with. So we didn't have a lot going on here before. So what we can do with our new version of our second asteroid and its collision with the ship, to save us some time, is come back to our first asteroid, to its version of collision with the ship. Select all of those actions, right-click, and choose Copy. Then we'll come back to our second asteroid, and we can delete those out and paste in the actions from our first asteroid. Now, obviously, we need to make changes to those. They're not going to be the same, but some of it's the same. We still are checking to see if it's invincible. We're still exiting, but instead of playing the and we're still playing the ship explosion, still changing to the invincible ship, still jumping, still creating a shield, still doing all of that. We're still losing a life. So where is it going to be different? Really, the only place it's going to be different is here, when we are going to instantiate a couple versions of the small asteroid. Before we created those on our asteroid 1, we created medium, 2 versions of the medium one. Now we're going to create 3 versions of the small one. So I can click on this create instance and just change it to asteroid 3, and then I'm going to delete out the second one, and I'll come back to the one I just changed, and I'll do a copy and do a paste and do another paste. And there we go. Now we're going to create 3 instances of our small asteroid, and everything else just stays the same. So that's pretty quick. Now let's come down to our third asteroid, and it too needs to change, right? So let's start off by deleting the actions we have now for our collision with the ship event, and come back to number 1 or number 2, it doesn't matter. Select all of those actions and copy them. Come to our asteroid 3, paste them all in. Now we don't have to do quite as much with the little asteroids, mainly because now we're not going to create any new instances of asteroids, so we can delete those out. And then everything else on our list stays exactly the same, so we don't have to change any of it. Okay, let's save that. We'll take a quick look. Still, some things aren't going to be quite working, but we're getting closer to our deluxe version of the game. Okay, now we've got our shooter here. We hit that, it explodes the way it's supposed to. Okay, in testing, I found a few things that need to be cleaned up, as you'll need to do when you're making your own too. First of all, on our asteroid object, the collision with laser, we set the score so the player can have scores, but we forgot to do that for our second and third asteroid collision with laser, so let's go ahead and do that. Come down to the object laser, and we'll give them some points, and just for simplicity I'll make that 10 as well. Same thing with our third asteroid, collision with the laser. Give them some points. And then on the shield object, you'll, as I mentioned before, you need to be triply careful to check the spelling. When I tested mine, I actually had spelled this one as invisible, so it had a hard time. And then on this alarm event, make sure that you're also destroying the shield. Okay, so after a couple seconds, the shield gets destroyed. Okay, now we're getting really close to having everything work appropriately. Let's move on to our controller object and make any changes that we need to have with it. Coming into the create event for our object controller, we already set the Invincible variable. Let's do a couple other things. So we got rid of our health bar. Instead we're going to use lives. So let's come down to the lives section on the score and set lives to 3. And let's play a sound. This is going to be kind of a background space sound called, not surprisingly, sound back. We'll want to loop it so that it plays continuously. And that's it for our create event. And then the finished version up on the course site, I also have some music playing in the background, but I left it out of this one to keep the file size small. Come to our step event, and oh boy, we're going to make lots and lots of changes to our step event. So let me walk through these right now. First of all, we're going to keep this part about checking if the number of instances is 0. Then before, what we did is restart the game. Well, we're gonna modify that a little bit. So I'm going to get rid of everything that we've got after this test instance event. So if we have no asteroids left, if we're down to 0 asteroids, then we're going to do a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to add in a start block, and then I'm going to do a test. And what I'm going to test for is to see whether or not there are any rooms to come in the game, whether we have more levels in the game. So I'm going to check whether there's another room. So if next room exists, then I'm going to do another start block and come back to score, or come back to our main one and say, well, then go to that room. And you can use an effect if you like. I'll choose fade in and out. And do end of block, and then an else statement. So if a room exists, go to that room. If there is no room, then we're going to show the score table, and we're going to restart the game. Put an end of block, and then another end of block to show we've reached the end of this first set of questions. We also need to figure out what to do if the player loses all of his lives. So we're going to, on the score tab, grab the test for lives. If there are 0 lives left, then again we'll show the score table, and we will restart the game. Remembering that since we have 2 actions in here, we need to have a start block and an end block. So boy, lots and lots going on there. Let's go to our draw event. Currently we're drawing a health bar, which we don't want anymore, so you can delete that out. And instead we're going to draw lives, and we're going to draw those lives as an image. We want to position it. I'm positioning mine on the top of the screen toward the right side of the screen, and I need to tell which sprite we're going to show to represent our lives, and we're going to choose sprite lives. Alright, now we're extremely close. I think we may have almost everything. So test your game out and see what works, and read any errors that may show up on the screen, and if there are errors, come back and fix them. Otherwise, you're just about there. So now you'll hear a background image. If you get hit, you lose a life. If there are no more rooms, it shows the top score table and then restarts the game. And that's pretty much it. From here you can go through and start adding more rooms, creating more and more challenging levels. And as you do so, you've already built up the code by duplicating the existing room to move from room to room to room to room. So that's it. That's it for your bonus version of this. Have fun playing with it. There are lots, obviously, more that you could do with it. But this gets you quite a long ways. So that's it.